I'm Steph.
And I'm Jeff. Each week, we review a film that's streaming online.
As writers, we'll deep dive into the characters and plot to tell you if it's a good story.
Listen at your own risk. This review contains spoilers.
Now sit back
Relax
and enjoy Stream On. Today, we'll be reviewing Burn, 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 streaming on Tubi.
Following the death of their friend Dan, Seth and Alex take a road trip across the UK, spreading his ashes at places that meant something to him. On the way, they learn more about themselves and life, which turns out to be better than it sounds.
Burn, Burn, Burn was directed by Shania Button in her directorial debut. It was written by Charlie Covell, and it's inspired by Jack Kerouac's famous 1957 novel On the Road. The film stars Chloe Peary as Alex, who is a lesbian who just got cheated on by her girlfriend, Laura Carmichael as Steph, a struggling actress / nanny who gets fired, Joe Dempsey as James, Steph's loyal boyfriend, and Jack Farthing as Dan, the friend of Alex and Steph who dies of terminal cancer.
So, Steph, you picked this film. Why?
So I would say two things. One, I was on the hunt for a dark comedy that the two of us could agree on with our ratings. So I figured trying a British dark comedy instead of an American might lower the ratings gap that we have. I also was looking for, with summer, like I love a good road trip film, especially summertime. And so I thought, we are getting back into being able to travel after we've been vaccinated and all that. And it would just be fun to do a road trip movie. So, yeah, those are the two reasons I picked this one.
Do you have a favorite road trip film?
I'd have to think about that.
We can come back to that later. I do generally like road trip movies. I also think that the road trip, that kind of narrative device, is good for imparting motion to your story, both literal motion, but also a direction for that story. So, why don't we get into the plot?
So, I chose this film because I was looking for a dark comedy, and I want to put emphasis on comedy. One of the things that I found, and I'm curious if you'll agree with me, is that with this film, and maybe it had to do with the subject matter, was dealing with grief and the death of Dan from terminal cancer, is that there was a lot of heavy themes and tearjerker moments that overwhelmed the comedic aspects of the film. And I guess I get that it's a dark comedy because you're dealing with grief and death and you're putting comedic overtones, but I felt I like cried more watching this movie than laughed. And to me, that's an issue in a dark comedy. You had Dan dying of cancer, which is heavy in and of itself. And he has this unresolved anger towards his mom leaving his dad and getting remarried. And that was a heavy thing. You have Alex's unresolved grief over her 2.5-year-old sister's death when she turned her back. She was 5 years old and she turned her back on watching her 2.5-year-old sister. And then she got run over. And so there's all this unresolved grief there and some heavy moments with her and her mom. You have Seth cheating on James. James is a nice guy. He seems like a good boyfriend overall, and Seth's cheating on him. And you've got him calling, trying to figure out what's going on, and her lying to him, and eventually she accepts his proposal. So you've got some heaviness there. You've got an old woman on the side of the road that they pick up hitchhiking, trying to escape her abusive husband that she's afraid is going to kill her if she goes back, and was trying to get to Scotland to find her son that she abandoned because of the abusive relationship. I mean, that's a lot of heavy plot elements in a dark comedy that overwhelmed the comedy. I'm curious of your thoughts. Did you think there was enough comedy in this film, or did it miss a bit on that for you?
Actually, it was fine because there is a distinct tonal shift to about 2/3 the way through the film. The first 2/3 of the film are much more a traditional dark comedy. There's a lot of humor, mostly through dialogue. It all has that kind of acerbic or bleak tone to it, but it's definitely meant to be humorous. The third act, when the film becomes a much more serious film, I didn't find that it overwhelmed the comedy because it seemed more purposeful. Like the film was less of a dark comedy throughout, it was more of a dramedy, where you have that comedic build up to introduce the characters and give you some insight into their lives and their outlook to the world. And then you do a third act twist into a more serious film that takes these characters that we've gotten to know and shows what their traumas are, the darker things that motivate them. So no, I thought it worked really well. It wouldn't have worked if there had been heavy drama moments sprinkled throughout the film, and I don't think there are. There are some serious moments throughout the film, but any good dark comedy is going to have some serious aspects. One of the reasons, one of the hallmarks of a dark comedy, it really is that third act twist. You have to change the tone, but it worked for me.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think to me this was more of a tearjerker than a comedy. Versus, I think of other dark comedies we reviewed, like A Simple Favor, more laughs for me than tears. Or Better Watch Out. I wanted to call out one scene because I'm curious if you found this funny. And this is an example of what I mean. Is that in one of the locations they go to, they're at an Airbnb, and the guy who runs the Airbnb is like a really passionate actor at his local church's production of the Passion play. He's playing like a Roman soldier. And anyway, he asked for Alex to basically act as a double for Jesus on the cross because they need to test out the harness, and the guy playing Jesus had something come up. So she agrees to do this for some odd reason, and so hanging hanging on the cross in this harness in this church, and then Seth comes in, and they have this dramatic exchange, and while Alex is hanging on this cross, that's when she confesses to how her sister dies, and it becomes this really powerful dramatic moment. And the the comedy was lost on me in that whole scene because of how much the drama overtook that scene. Did you still find that funny?
See, I don't think the comedy was lost, but you could say, or I would say, it was inappropriate for that scene. The funny part, of course, in that particular scene are the visuals. Alex is up on the cross, and they're having this extremely meaningful conversation between the two women where she is opening up to Seth. But the setting is odd and humorous. You have the sneer at the end where the guy who is supposed to be Jesus walks in. I think for that scene, though, for the dialogue, and I did think the dialogue between the two characters was fine, and the acting was fine, but that is one of those moments that should have been treated more seriously. Put the characters in a more normal setting, because this is a big moment for these two characters. If something is hinted at to the viewer earlier and you're waiting for something, for this thing to pay off or something to happen, like this secret, it's something that Alex has only told to Dan, this guilt that she has been carrying for years about the death of her little sister. And having it in a scene like that, I think undercuts some of the drama of that moment.
Right, right. I think it was just it was trying to be funny and dramatic at the same time, and it didn't work because the drama, it was more appropriate to just be a dramatic moment than a comedy. So yeah, but even with that issue I have with this film and having the Kleenexes handy, it's still an entertaining film. I liked how Dan, in his death, sent them on a quest around the United Kingdom to spread his ashes, and had videos along the way to like tell them something about his life, and also like have them do things for, because it was about their growth as well. I looked forward to what was the next video that Dan was going to have. It was a unique way to grieve. So I enjoyed that aspect of the film, and it was just nice to see these different settings around the United Kingdom. One of the settings is actually, so I did a road trip in the UK on my R&R from Iraq. It was me and my buddy Rob, who's from London, and we, on his motorcycle, we road tripped around southern England, and we went to Glastonbury. And Glastonbury is one of the places they go in this film. So there are actually quirky druid people that are in Glastonbury. It's a thing. So when they had that funny scene where they pick up this modern day druid and go to the druid dance party, I was like, I could totally see that in Glastonbury. So it was kind of neat because it brought me back to my days when I did a road trip through the UK. But what did you think about just the road trip aspect itself of this film?
Well, as I said earlier, road trips are a good plot structure. They are a good way to give characters adventures, give your characters a destination so your plot has a natural progression. You can isolate them if you want to. They're in the same car, so you can have like natural dialogue between your characters. As you're telling your story, you are moving from place to place, and you can present a bit of local color and just some interesting visuals. You have those moments, those plot points, those places they go to through the story that you can provide just like a highlight of, or something that is humorous or dramatic or terrifying, depending on the type of road trip movie you're making, as they're going on the way to their destination. And each of these stops on the way becomes a way for you to tell parts of your story. The location itself then becomes a way to convey the narrative.
It's great for post-apocalyptic films too, like trying to get from one location to another, like a safe house or where the zombies or whatever isn't located. Like I find that movies like The Road, for example, right? They work really, road trips work well in a setting like that.
This kind of plot works in a lot of different genres. You definitely can have a movie like Easy Rider, which is one of the quintessential road trip films from the 60s, where you get to see the characters going through various aspects of America, or Westerns. A lot of them lend themselves to this kind of story, like the wagon train going to the promised land, or the posse looking for someone.
Like True Grit would be an example of a good Western. I mean, instead of a car, it's a horse. You're going somewhere.
That's it. The idea is that the road trip film allows you to use the journey as a plot device, but also a reason for your characters to develop.
Would you consider the Lord of the Rings trilogy a road trip film in a sense?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. When you asked earlier about what is one of my favorite road trip films, I mean, that if we're expanding what we mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a car, but it's about that journey is a key part of the story and getting to that destination and all the trials and tribulations along the way, then yeah, Lord of the Rings trilogy is epic.
Well, because the finale for that is kind of anticlimactic based on everything that has happened. Frodo wrestles Gollum, and then Gollum falls into Mount Doom, and that's it. It's a journey that's important. And that's why with this film, I think it works really well, because we see these two characters change, in part because of the experiences they have on the road, the people they meet, and the choices they have to make, and how the protagonists react to different things over the course of a few days. And those things change the perceptions they have of each other. So yes, the structure works really well for the story.
Why it works well is, one, road trips inherently are an interesting story because you're curious about what's going to happen in terms of the destination and the journey along the way, but also as an allegory to the grief process, that when you go through grief, it's not it is a process. It's a journey that you take of having to mourn the loss and honor the energy of that person. And so a road trip paired with how grief works, because both are really about the journey and the process, I thought that the two together worked really well.
Yeah, I can see that. I agree completely. I think it does work really well. They are complementary. Is there anything, though, about the plot that didn't work for you? We seem to agree that the decision to use the road trip structure works well for the story. But are there parts of the plot that didn't work?
Well, other than just how much it was more drama than comedy, which we've already talked about. There is another thing that the film does. They really rely heavily on character happenstance. And what I mean by that is that Seth and Alex, along their road trip to spread Dan's ashes, run into a lot of quirky characters, and you have to do quite a bit of suspending of disbelief on the likelihood that these two women on this grief road trip would run into this amount of unusual characters. So we start off with Adam, who's a modern day druid, and they just run into him on the side of the road. He invites them to a really fun druid barn party rave. They discuss the impermanence of life, party it up, and then he ends up hitchhiking with them. Okay, I can buy that. There's a lot of quirky people in Glastonbury, but there is a bit of happenstance that they would just randomly find him on the side of the road. Then you've got the Airbnb Passion of the Christ actor, also a little unusual. Then you've got another random person on the side of the road, the old woman hitchhiker with the sign trying to escape her abusive husband. And that's the thing, because they were not going to go to Scotland, which was the final step on the journey to spread Dan's ashes, because there had been so much drama between them. They just decided that they were just going to skip that and not finish their trip. And this random woman on the side of the road was needed to get to Scotland to the exact place that Dan wanted them to go. It was such like plotty element there to get them back on mission. And I mean, in the context of this story, you are suspending some disbelief, but this isn't a sci-fi or a horror. This is a dark comedy or a dramedy type of film. So I thought they relied a little too much on character happenstance to move the story along. What are your thoughts?
The kind of plot elements you're talking about, that we're going to meet different characters who, bring comedic elements, but also create opportunities for growth, is fairly standard for road trip stories. Easy Rider is like that. Two Lane Blacktop is like that. Our protagonists, as they travel from place to place, they need to meet characters or be in situations that either resonate with the theme of the film, in this case, the comedic elements, but also provide those opportunities for character growth. And that goes back to what I was saying about one of the things I like about road trip stories, is that you don't have to do a serious deep dive into any one place you go to or any one character that you meet. But one of the drawbacks can be something that you're talking about, is that you can have characters who are one-dimensional, that are there to give the protagonist some plot thing to move forward with.
And I think the one I struggle with the most, like I accepted a few of them in the context of, yes, I agree. You need to meet interesting people along the way for your characters to grow and make the road trip interesting. But I think it was the older woman at the end with the sign escaping her abusive husband. It just so happened she needed to get to the same place in Scotland that they were going. I think that was a bridge too far for me. That was the one that really bugged me. And I think it also didn't work for me that they were going to just not finish their trip because they had an argument and there was tension between them. They decided to not complete their trip. I think I needed some other way that got them back on course to Scotland behind besides using that older woman hitchhiker.
And that was the problem I had with that part of the third act, basically the end of the film, is that the characters were going to give up, and I didn't think that worked for the story. That final leg of the trip should have been how these two characters who started out close and then because of some decisions and actions along the trip drew apart, mostly revolving around Steph and how she treated James. That final part of the trip should have been the two of them on their own deciding to finish the trip and then coming back together. Even though that's kind of what we got, I don't think we needed them to decide to stop and then have this random woman giving them the impetus to complete their task, their quest. I thought that the actor who played the older woman was a really nice mix of fear, trauma, and hope. And it was well done for someone who basically has, like, what, maybe 10 minutes of screen time.
Oh, I agree. I mean, it was a powerful moment when she reunited with her son and everything. It just was not, it didn't follow the plot of this film well.
Yeah, she seemed kind of out of place. And more than that, it didn't seem that necessary for the film to get where it wanted to get. It should have focused more on the two protagonists after all they've gone through, deciding to do the, deciding to finish the journey on their own. It did not need the catalyst of the other character.
Exactly. And you could have fleshed out a little bit more Seth and James and how you close that story loop because they pretty much had her on the phone and ostensibly you think she's going to call off the engagement and that she's not ready to be with him and this and that, but they don't fully wrap that up in a satisfying way.
They do. Maybe not in a satisfying way, but they do wrap it up. When Seth and Alex are in Scotland, there is a scene where Seth is taking off her engagement ring and pocketing it. So I did take that as meaning she told, James that the engagement was off and she didn't want to marry him.
Yeah, I mean, you could read into that, but I guess I just wanted a little bit more. I wanted to see James' reaction. I wanted more there to wrap that storyline up. And you could have, the time that you had spent with that older woman hitchhiker, you could have invested in wrapping things up more fully with Seth and James.
I was fine with how the filmmakers handled that storyline, with one exception. And that was James's penultimate moment when he tracks down Seth and Alex. And the two of them are in a cafe, and he comes in and lays into Seth, and he doesn't realize she has cheated on him, but he is very angry that, she ghosted on him. He has done a lot of things for her, including getting her the job she managed to have at the beginning of the film, and managed to smooth over an incident was going to get her fired. He's a supportive person who seems pretty healthy, but then he proposes to her. That character should have just said she's a horrible person, walked out. And it made James seem far too needy, given what we've seen of him before.
Yeah, he wasn't a well developed character to begin with because obviously the focus is Alex and Seth primarily and a bit of Dan. But I took that moment to be a desperate act of codependency, like that he was sensing she was drifting away. And maybe in his mind, he was thinking it had to do with how she was grieving for Dan's loss and this and that. And that they had been together for years, is what it sounds like. In a desperate act of like, I don't want to lose you. I'm going to show you I'm serious. That it was, yeah, one of those Hail Mary proposals. It worked for me because they hadn't done enough development of James that he could have had that characteristic.
It would have worked better for me if she had said no when he proposed. Her doing that would have made her seem less needlessly cruel. The next morning, after James and Seth have slept together, and Alex confronts her, she just says, "Oh, well, of course I'm not going to marry him."
Seth is not that great of a character. Like I liked Alex a lot more than I did Seth in this film, but Seth seems she's very selfish, and a bit narcissistic. If you didn't do that, the challenge is if you didn't do that and have her say yes when she really meant no and the cheating and all the stuff, you wouldn't have had as much tension between those Seth and Alex that also drove this film. One of the big things that caused tension is that Alex was not only grieving Dan's death, but also grieving the fact that her girlfriend cheated on her and she walked in on them, and this is around the same time that Dan died, and so her seeing Seth repeat the same thing and cheat on James on this road trip in a club bathroom was that re-triggered her and her own grief as a victim of cheating, and then further to see how she's leading James on with saying yes to the proposal. I mean, that is what led to that tension in that moment between them with the cross and all that. So you would have had to get there another way if you didn't have that development with Steph and James.
But do you think it makes Seth look too negative? These are characters that we are supposed to see growing through the course of the film. By the time she says this to James, we are already at the beginning of the third act.
Yeah, it did make me not like Steph very much as a character, and I was more focused on Alex and her journey than Steph. So I don't know if that was their intent or not, but I very much was invested in Alex's storyline versus Steph's storyline. It wasn't redemptive enough for me because it was so late in the film, like at the very end where she calls him and takes off her ring, that she became unlikable.
I want to bring up one scene that I found didn't work with either the darkly comic tone or even the tragic tone of this film. And that is when Alex and Seth, after the nightclub scene, go into a liquor store.
Yes, that scene. I this is my worst scene.
I think it's useful to bring up because you have a film that, even if you can have different opinions of how the shift in tone works from dark comedy to drama, it is still a film that has competent plotting. You understand why everything's happening. You understand how the scenes lock together. The scenes we get are darkly comic or tragic or both. But this scene involves our protagonist going to a liquor store to purchase some libations, and three guys in there are about to sexually assault them.
It's so out of place in this film. Like I said, I rated this as my worst scene, but I'll go ahead and get into it now. And then when we get there, I can just say, well, it's what we already talked about. But it's yeah, I mean, after they went to the nightclub and Steph cheated and this and that, they're at the gas station and they clearly are having a fight between the two of them verbally over Steph's decision to cheat on James. And then out of nowhere, these three drunk guys start like calling Alex a dyke and like uh, about to sexually assault her, and then Steph flaps her hands like a crazy person to scare them off, saying she learned it in some self-defense class. Like it was just such an odd, out of place, didn't belong in this movie. Like you could have gotten rid of that scene completely and had them have tense moments and words in the car as they're going to their next destination about Steph's cheating, which they do. So I don't know why they chose to include this scene in the film. It was very strange.
It is mystifying, and it's particularly odd when you see a story that otherwise is fairly well plotted.
The only thing I can think of is they were trying to show something redemptive about Steph because she had just cheated on her boyfriend very callously in a bathroom in this club, and it obviously was hurting Alex. That maybe they were trying to show that Steph's still a good person. She protected her friend from getting sexually assaulted in the gas station. I don't know, but it's even with that, like it still didn't work.
My assumption is that whatever motive the writer had, it is probably along the lines that you propose. I think they wanted to give Seth an immediate redemptive moment, and they thought that the scene would be amusing with her running around with her arms flapping.
Is there anything else about the plot that you would like to discuss, Jeff?
Not really. I just have one general comment. It should be fairly clear by now that there is nothing in this film that reinvents this kind of film, this kind of story. The film has a fine plot. If I'd read a book with this plot, I would have been, this is fine. It's average. But I believe the material here was elevated by the acting. I think all the actors, starting with Alex and Steph, and then getting into all the secondary players, it's all well done. That actor does a good job of conveying pathos and humor and anger. The director got great performances out of the cast. And I do think that is something, like I said, that does elevate this story.
Yeah, I mean that it makes a difference when you are able to get strong performances out of your actors. So, okay, well, let's go into the wrap up then.
Okay, Steph, what is your favorite scene in Burn, Burn, Burn?
I loved the Druid dance party. It was such a weird, fun scene. You had people in fur coats and daisy chains and colorful masks dancing around. Adam, who's the quirky druid guy that they picked up on the side of the road, he's wearing antlers and they burn a wicker man like character in some new age pagan ceremony. There was really great music set to the visuals of the scene, and then they end with looking up at the stars and Adam philosophizing on life and death and the impermanence of it all. And it was a fun scene, and it captures the quirkiness of Glastonbury in a way that was comedic and enjoyable to watch. What about you?
I like the entire sequence at Alex's mother's house. The acting was really good. We get to see a nice differentiation between Alex and Seth. Alex is clearly uncomfortable the whole time, but we never really find out why until later. Seth is, the much more outgoing person. She like immediately hugs the mom. We get some nice red herrings about what this discomfort between Alex and her mothers could be. I think at one point Seth brings up Alex's sexuality. We do get a nice hint when we see Alex's mother looking at a photo of what is clearly Alex as a little girl and another little girl, which you can assume is her sister. Because this entire Amy subplot is an important part of the story, it is hinted at that it is a secret relationship between Alex and Amy. And you don't find until later who Amy really is, right? It seems like she's some secret girlfriend. But there are some little clues in the sequence with the mom that there is something else happening, something related to the sister, even though we don't know the sister's name. But anyway, the acting in those scenes is really good, and I like how it's a nice mix of humor and drama. So, Steph, what is your least favorite scene?
So we've already talked about this. I mentioned it earlier. It's the convenience store sexual harassment scene. Tonally way off in this film. Doesn't need to be there. What about you?
I did not like the introduction of the woman at the end of the film. We talked about that. I don't think we need to go over it again. But as I said, it seemed unnecessary. So, Steph, on a scale of 0 to 5 cremated pandas, what are you going to give Burn, Burn, Burn?
I gave it 3 out of 5. This is a better than average dark comedy. It did lose points for me because the film felt a bit maudlin at times and not enough comedic elements, but it was beautifully shot around the UK. It makes you want to go on a road trip. Uh, it's an interesting exploration of grief. I liked how they focused on the importance of valuing the time that we have left on earth and living authentically and the importance of processing trauma. And as a clinical social worker, I really appreciated that in this film. Did have some like deep psychological moments, strong acting. So overall, I would recommend this film, but if you are expecting laughs, I would also have some tissues on hand as fair warning. What about you, Jeff?
I went a little bit higher. I gave it 3.5 pandas. And since they are cremated, you can easily have half of one. I echo everything you said. I thought it was a very good mix of humor and drama. We had, some bits we talked about that were a little problematic, but overall, a very good film.
And just really good music too. Like some of the songs I would listen to again. Like I loved the soundtrack.
I agree. I glad you mentioned that because it did have a really good soundtrack.
Catchy songs that'll stay in your head.
Yeah, there are a lot of earworms, the songs you can't get out of your head.
And there are sometimes movies that just have terrible soundtracks and things don't match, and it takes a lot of skill to find the right songs to fit with the tone of your movie. And whoever chose that, I mean, they did a great job. Okay, Jeff. Well, what do we have coming up next week?
So next week we're going to be going to Shudder to watch The Howling. Join us then. Stream On is a production of Steph and Jeff Wrights Media. Reproduction without written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved. 2021.